And we are live. So, welcome to episode 139 of An American Werewolf in New Jersey. I am the American Werewolf. In the house tonight, joining us on the late night, on the red eye there, is over in Dublin, is Marty from the Trash Picture Show. So I always appreciate it when he agrees to stay up late when it's good for him. And thanks for coming on again, man. It's been a minute. I can't remember what was the last one we did.
Christ, I can't actually recollect myself. It wasn't too long ago. We've done something recently, but I don't know.
It was Predator. It was Predator.
No meaning.
Yeah.
It was
Predator. All right, setting up for Prey. Okay. And then we've got John K. Alvarez. And he has a lovely kitchen there that he wants to show us. So, and we're always appreciative of that. And thanks for stopping in, man.
Well, in case people wonder how much weight I got, it's because I have such a lovely kitchen.
That's exactly right. It's filled with carbs. And that's the carb kitchen he's got there.
That's right.
All right, and shooting from the right side, we a first-time guest on the show. We've got Frank from The Harsh Truth. And he's going to be shooting it straight, I imagine, for this movie. Thanks for coming on. We've been trying to get it together for a while and hadn't been able to. But then this is as good a movie as any to kick off. So thanks for stopping in.
Yeah, no problem. I know me and you've been going back and forth for a while trying to get together on something. I'm glad we finally managed to work it out. Hopefully this is the first of many good collaborations going forward.
Indeed. I feel exactly the same. And it's very cool to get new people on here. It's a good thing. Speaking of people that are not new, but are always good to have on board, we've got the Welcome to Cinema podcast, who are recurring guests, and I always enjoy having them on. We were just finishing up The Mist. On their show, which will probably come out a little later on in a couple of weeks or something, if I remember the timeline correctly. But I appreciate you agreeing to come on for this show. Usually it's we pick a movie, we do it on your show, and then you come back and do it on mine, and it saves time. But this time, we're doing something completely different. And thanks for stopping.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Yeah, very excited to talk about Children of Men.
Always. Yeah, I mean, it's a damn fine movie. There was a time about 15 years ago, and John and Marty and probably Frank, and maybe you guys too will remember, when Clive Owen was the it guy. Mm-hmm. He had a run there that lasted about 5-10 years, and then I'm not exactly sure what happened, but he sort of disappeared. I'm a fan. I'm a Clive Owen fan. Mm-hmm. He's a little old now, but back in the day, I probably would have put him in the running for a James Bond. His King Arthur is my favorite King Arthur. I mean, I know it doesn't have all the glory and spectacle of Excalibur, but I thought it was just fantastic. This movie, he's involved in my favorite Spike Lee movie called Inside Man, which is about a robbery where he's the lead robber. And, it seemed like, if he wasn't going to, get any, well, it seemed like he was on the verge of like superstardom. Like he was a star, but then he was just going to boom. And then I don't know what happened. Does anybody know? He just kind of disappeared, it seemed like. Maybe he rejected, that. Does anyone know what happened to him?
I did read an interview where he was talking about he got tired of playing the same parts. It seems that he was receiving a lot of that. I disagreed. I thought he was actually showing a lot of diversity in his roles, but
yeah, same here.
Thought they were sounding similar.
Oh, geez. Okay, well, maybe he's one of those guys with ridiculous standards that never satisfy. Okay, well, whatever it is, we have an impressive body of work that. I enjoy. I own several of his movies. And tonight, we're here to talk about one of my favorites of his, maybe even more so than King Arthur. And that's 2006's Children of Men. So if you guys are ready to go, shall we kick it off?
Idiot.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Boogie woogie. So I think that if we've learned anything over the past 2 years, it's how fragile everything is.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of what your opinions are on this or who, I think collectively we all can agree that things aren't quite as stable as we might have taken them, as we might have thought previously. And the 20 years that occurred before that. So if you're, a product and you remember the 90s, you probably thought, things were, pretty much on bedrock. And we've learned, you know, uh, in a screwed up kind of way, that it's, just kind of the opposite of that. And then in the past 2 years, we've had health become a global kind of concern. Again, regardless of
Mm-hmm.
what your opinions are on this or that. We've seen a lot of sickness and, a lot of people, probably everybody knows somebody or one or two people away from someone who's died. And this is a different kind of dystopian movie, and that it's not about, nuclear attacks or, anything like that, or, monsters, or what we
Mm-hmm.
were just talking about on Walk the Cinema in the Mist, or, alien invasions. This is something I hadn't really considered. It's about 18 years of infertility, about 20 or so years of infertility, no children having been born. So society is sort of low key dying. Not to use, too much modern language, but things are just sort of dying off, and as a result of that, things are collapsing on a lot of other fronts. The movie starts off with day 1,000 of the siege of Seattle, which could have been, 2020 to the core.
Mm-hmm.
Borders have been cemented shut, practically. Mass deportations, people that are refugees or not, citizens are being, sent back to their home countries and rounded up forcibly. Occupation of mosques, terrorist bombs and violence. You get the impression that maybe America has fallen apart because this movie takes place in the UK. Give me some of your. Maybe we can go around a little bit. Give me some of your initial impressions about the film in general, and maybe the setting. Marty, do you wanna start off?
Like as you said, this movie is a dystopian kind of, I don't know, would you call it an apocalyptic movie? But it brings to mind a famous T.S. Eliot quote: "The world shall not end with a bang, but a whimper." And this
Mm.
movie just solidifies that because
Mm-hmm.
the human race is slowly dying off. And there's a brilliant dichotomy with this movie as well, in that you have this girl who's discovered she is actually carrying a child. She is fertile and she's carrying a child, and she's the last hope for the human race. But as the movie progresses, we see how the human race is kind of degraded to a level of such kind of amoral and horrible kind of socio-political kind of standing, and that you've got these concentration camps, that you've got like people being executed because they're trying to flee from a war-torn country, but because the British government don't want their own population being overtaken, they've taken a hard line to it. So you're like, should the human race be saved? Because you're just witnessing harrowing event after harrowing event, and it makes you wonder, well, are we worth saving? And I think that's the fucking brilliance of this movie, and it's a fantastic movie, as you said.
Okay, John.
The one thing that drew me to this movie when I first saw it, of many times that I did wind up watching it, was the fact that it was a believable concept. A lot of time when it comes to science fiction, or where I admit that I'm a science fiction snob, because there's a lot of people who will say sci fantasy is science. I'm like, no, that's comparing apples to an automobile. It's different. The true sense of science fiction is that it can come out of a believable concept
Out of
and
science.
taken to an imaginary extent. I love the fact that in this movie, not to give anything away to like jumping around, but you never knew what happened. It just comes in saying this happened, and it's been this many years, and you see it in the opening coffee shop scene where you see what happened to the last person that was born, so to speak. And I loved that everything about it, from the cars to the attitude to the signs on the billboards of buses to commercials, you could make common sense that this would have happened if this tragic event did occur,
Okay.
type deal. I love that, as opposed to glitz and glamour and laser fights and don't get me wrong, I love them, but instead of that, it was just a great story that was told and unfolded before you in a very gray looking world.
Frank, what do you got?
Yeah, you've already said this movie hits a lot differently after the last couple of years of everything we've all experienced. It's just some of that dystopian stuff. You kind of watch it now, especially some of the stuff that came out around that time, like in the early mid 2000s, and you're kind of like, wow, we've kind of been really this close to seeing that out of humanity. But I do agree that one of the fun things about the movie, one of the things that made the movie much more interesting, is that they never really explain what happened. It's just it happened, and you're dealing with it, and that adds a little bit to the mystery, not knowing why something happens, or even for that matter, what happens. Just dealing with the aftermath of it all kind of makes things that much more scary, and I think it adds to the dread that is kind of always kind of weighing heavy on you over the course of this movie. Because I know there's actiony parts, but it's like you find yourself kind of like when you try to sympathize with the characters a little bit and put yourself in their place, you feel the weight of everything they're going through without having any real details because it's so dense. But this movie does approach pretty specifically one thing that you have to ask yourself if humankind would ever find itself in this position is how would people react? Because systems and objects aren't necessarily evil in themselves; they're very inert. It's always people. People always tend to screw things up, and that's you talked earlier about how all these countries have fallen. There's a clip of the movie where it says Chicago's fallen, Bangladesh has fallen. It's basically all these cities and countries all over the world are basically just on fire, and they're crumbling down and around what they once were. And the only country that's managed to kind of keep it together by becoming a totalitarianism kind of state is the UK, and that's kind of the extent that everybody wants to go to when they face adversity. It's an interesting character study, not about a character, but about humanity, which I thought was interesting.
What about you two? Caitlin, this was your first time viewing. Give us some thoughts.
So at first, as the movie, starts to get into what happened and, building up to set the stage, I kind of felt it felt a little standard to me, where it's like, okay, you have this dystopian type scenario where life is kind of normal, like people go to work and stuff and all that. But then as the movie progresses and you learn more about what all went down, and all the people that our main character meets, it's very moving to me. I was really moved by this movie, more so than I had anticipated, I feel. So.
G?
I just love the dystopian aspect of this that focuses on the system and how the system treats the people.
Okay.
But I also really like that it doesn't focus on the main character trying to take down the system, but he's trying to find hope for humanity by bringing, this baby to light without endangering the baby or the mother. And it's not about like taking down the government, even though, it shows that the government's terrible. It treats people terribly. But I think it focuses on all the right things, and it hits emotional notes, and sometimes it has action sequences. It just does it all really well.
It's almost kind of like a documentary that's showing, these people sort of drift from one place to the next. And, documentaries are, usually not action filled, but every once in a while it's interspersed with something very intense. I think that what I sort of focused on here was the Theo character, Clive Owen's character, and that there's not just him alone, but throughout society. There's also like a spiritual infertility. Like everybody's just, depressed. You find out that the government has been low-key, like quietly handing out suicide kits along with antidepressants to people. You see him, and the story opens up with, the world's youngest person who was like 18 years old, this baby Diego, who's sort of famous only for that. And so anybody who knows any kind of 18-year-old knows they probably want absolutely nothing to do with anything like that, especially under those sorts of conditions. And the story opens up where someone asks him for an autograph, and I think he says no. And so someone stabs him to death. Like it's degraded that badly. And so you see these people in the coffee house, and all the women are crying because this is the youngest person alive. And the men are just kind of staring blankly. And then through all that, you've got Clive Owen, and he just doesn't seem to give a shit. He's just become completely apathetic to the fact that the world is falling apart, and he's kind of pushing through everybody, ordering his tea or his coffee or whatever it is. That's like, you're all in my fucking way, just get out of the way. I want to get my tea. I got to get to work, like it rolls right off of him like water off a duck's ass, And then, he goes outside and he lifts the lid and he pulls out his little bottle because he's going to put a little nip in his coffee before work because he's got to get to, I guess that's how he's getting by. He's self-medicating probably a little heavily. And then all of a sudden a suicide bomb goes off. And that's like in the first 3 minutes of the movie. So it just sets up everything perfectly that, everybody's just in this state of despair and, they're suffering or they're just apathetic. And, you've just got the main character who just doesn't seem to give a shit, but clearly he is affected. And then throughout the course of the story, he just sort of has life bled back into him again. And that was in this viewing, he was the main focus of my observation, not society. I'm not saying anybody's wrong. I'm just saying what it was that I watched. And when I say had life bled back, that implies a lot of cuts. And so he just suffers horror after horror after horror, and in the end develops the capacity to sort of give a shit again.
Right.
About things, and it kind of takes off from there. It's very much about the possibility of hope, and this man who sort of loses everything, but in the end, maybe, just maybe. And I just thought that it's an original story. It's fantastic. You've got an ensemble cast. You got Clive Owen, you got Michael Caine, and you got Julianne Moore. It's fantastic. After the bomb, he doesn't even give a shit. He just calls out of work. Like he just had a suicide bomb go off like 10 meters from him. And he just goes into work and he tells his boss, I'd like to, sort of work from home today. Do you mind? And his boss, everybody just has that blank look on their face. They're either sobbing or they have that just completely 1,000-yard stare. And he proceeds to go to Michael Caine's house, his only friend, because that's all he seems to have is this one friend, and that's it. Other than that, he goes to work and he goes home. So, I mean, Marty, do you want to take on from there? I mean, what did you think of the Michael Caine character?
Michael Caine's character was one of the few elements of levity in the whole thing, and I kind of got worried for his character when Julianne Moore. I hope you don't mind spoilers, but when
no, it's 2006, man.
Okay, so when Julianne Moore bites the bullet, you're like, okay, no one's safe in this fucking movie, and you're kind of like, oh shit, I like this character, and things aren't going to end well for him, but he is this small kind of glimmer of hope in, as you guys described, a very kind of bleak kind of a scenario, and I think he has very little screen time but the interactions he has with Clive Owen's character lets us know that there's this really deep history and friendship that these characters do. And again, I think it lends it even more to like, okay, when we start losing characters in the movie really sets us up to like them, and I think
Mhm.
it's good at giving the kind of gut punch every time we lose a character, including Michael Caine's character. It's just a little more of any kind of like hope is chipped away. So I think that's his character serves a fantastic purpose for that as well.
Frank, what did you think of Michael Caine's character? Because I'm going to start the storyline in a second, but I want to get some of the people that are kind of new and hear their, and then we'll
Well,
go
he's
from
Michael
there.
Caine. He's the Hall of Famer. I
Yeah.
mean, he could have just stood there and talked for 2 hours, and he would have been kind of engrossing. But it is interesting to see him kind of play this. I don't want to call him a hippie, but just kind of this. He's a guy who's been around for a while. He remembers the old way of life before whatever happens. So he's got the experience of both living in both these worlds, both pre and post whatever the incident is. So he's got this strange perspective that a lot of people, I'm guessing, just don't have in this world. And the ones that do have completely kind of lost it. They've kind of lost their grip on the way life used to be, so they've kind of given up. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I mean, he's an all-star. I mean, the guy, like I said, he could sit there and read the phone book for 2 hours, and his movie would make $200 million because he's Michael Caine. He is very much a chameleon. I mean, he has been for most of his career. You can put him in any role, any time, acting like whatever you want him to act like, and he's going to kill it. But yeah, he is that little bit of levity in a movie that overall is very dark. I mean, the film, the tone of this film, the color palettes even are all like gray and dark blue. There's not really
they're very chrome.
There's not really a lot of color in this movie to make you feel warm because the situation isn't one that makes you feel warm,
Even when we get to the end, it doesn't really end on any sort of sunshiny kind of, warm music kind of thing. And Jasper, I'm going to disagree with you, Frank. I think he's definitely an old hippie. He's got that hair. He's smoking weed in the middle of the day. He's just kind of.
He's not the prototypical old hippie. He's a little different. He's kind of at another level.
He's the dystopian old hippie. Okay, and he lives
sell out old hippie.
Yeah. Well, he lived. That's an interesting point because he lives in seclusion.
Mm-hmm.
He lives in seclusion, and he takes care of his wife, who it seems to was an investigative reporter. The government seems to have. It's implied that she was captured and tortured, and now lives, in this sort of traumatized state where she really doesn't speak. But he's the one piece of levity and humor through all this. I think because he lives away from the despair of the major metropolitan cities.
I was going to point that out. His seclusion is what makes him what he is, because everyone else is just working in the city is just so just glazed and unemotional. They have to go to work and they walk past cages full of refugees, and they get on the bus and they get told how much the government hates refugees, and they go to work and they just sit there, look at their computer, click away. And this guy lives in the middle of the woods and he's growing weed, and of course it's going to be different from the people living in the city and getting hit over the head with all these political messages of sadness and no hope.
Yeah, there's a definite contrast in what's going on outside, like the vehicles. Like there's one scene where he's on the train and people are just heaving rocks at the train, and the windows are fenced over, and a couple different scenes we'll get to. Hold on a second, we got some comments here. We got a Fred Weedow saying hello to me and the gang. And then we've got Eric from Hey Internet Eric here. And Eric will be joining us later tonight for a different stream at 10 o'clock. Saying, damn, completely full panel tonight. Thanks, man. He's welcoming Frank to the show. And he says, my favorite Clive Owen movies are Sin City and Shoot 'Em Up. I don't know Shoot 'Em Up. You haven't seen Children of Men or King Arthur? You got to get on that, man.
Yeah.
And then we got the Agoraphobe saying, hey, everybody, haven't seen this before. Oh, man, you got to see it. Now, I should mention that this movie never streams.
Right.
It almost never streams. I don't know whether it's because it's considered some sort of like borderline art film or whatever, but you'll never see it on Tubi. It's never on HBO. It's never on Prime. It's never on Netflix or anything like that. I ended up buying my own copy It's definitely worth owning because it's cinema. This is, I mean, when I say all the time, give me a story, this is what I'm talking about. Give me a fucking story.
Anytime I walk by a DVD or Blu-ray rack, if I see a Children of Men, I usually pick it up because I always lose my copy or give it to somebody and it never comes back. So I want to make sure I always have it in the background for that reason.
It's like breaking up with a girl and you got to buy all those sweatshirts again. You're like, fuck, I really like that Bob Marley. Now it's streaming services. There's not such a thing as losing your Bob Marley CDs for those of us who remember. But you're still out of sweatshirts. Yeah, you still need those sweatshirts. So I mean, he gets sort of low. I keep using that word low key. I gotta stop. What's happening to our language? He gets jacked in the middle. Did it again. He gets kidnapped in the middle of the street by these terrorists, a terrorist organization. That's what I'm going to call them, called the Fishes. And the Fishes on the surface are fighting for what they say are the rights of refugees. And he's reintroduced to Julian, who is played by the fantastic Julianne Moore in this. And she is just awesome. She's fantastic, and wants to recruit him through some of his contacts that are a little spotty to get transit papers for a refugee girl. No questions asked. I can get you $5,000. It's like you're his ex. His ex reaches out of nowhere, ask him for a favor. I'll give you $5,000, and can you do this for me? Which sort of sets everything up. He ends up meeting Danny Houston, who's his cousin. And to show you, it's just such a great example of how badly things are falling apart. Danny Houston owns a Michelangelo. What is it, a Da Vinci? That sculpture of Botticelli?
Yeah. It was rescued artwork. Wasn't like a lot of the artwork destroyed. So he bought the private pieces, and it's kind of like, as well, there's a great scene where he's entering Danny Houston's kind of mansion or facility. He has to go across the bridge, and it's kind of like Fort Knox. So you're like, are the politicians, have they now fortified themselves because shit has gone so bad that they have to live in their own kind of compounds and stuff? I'm wondering, is that the case?
The ultimate gated community.
And it's an interesting thing because someone said it earlier that, and maybe we should talk about this for a second. What the UK is one of the few countries that are reasonably holding it together, and that's what they are. That's what a lot of other countries maybe are trying to model, because we're hearing, maybe Chicago is falling apart or Bangladesh. Or is this correct? I mean, are those the only two options?
Yeah.
Because what we're looking at when we see this movie is that the people that are really supposed to be fighting for the everyday Joe, or John refugee or Jane refugee, are just as bad, if not worse.
Right.
Like,
there's no sense of a good outcome in this movie. In the beginning, there's no, one of the things that makes Clive Owen's character, to me, that reminds me a lot of Bogart's character in Casablanca.
Oh yeah, right.
Nothing phases him. Everybody else is looking for hope, and he's just. And what happens is that you realize, at least the way it's set up for me, with no children, there's no future. With no future, there is no hope. So everyone's fighting for their own personal stake now. And I think that has to be in a sense of consideration, because even when you see what happens, or the sign of hope, without giving too much away before we talk about it, when she exposes herself to Clive Owen and her secret, that's when, he starts to become aware, and everybody else is still, they're using it as bartering chips as opposed to being hopeful about it.
Yeah, I mean,
there's something new here.
Even Julia, it starts with Theo and his, like, he's sort of shocked to see his ex again, and he's not with anybody, and, it's just, you can tell it grabs him by the heart a little bit.
Right.
just it starts. That's kind of how it starts. And then he goes to meet Key, and
Exactly.
it starts to become levity in the car when they're all talking, and
Right.
and then all of a sudden he and Julianne Moore pick it like right back up and off, because they
Right.
start to have this debate as to whether I should give a shit or not. And she is clearly in the camp of you should give a shit about what's happening in the world, and he's not there. But then they get together, and he sort of starts to, just for 5 minutes, he comes back to life.
Right.
And he starts to smile, and they're playing, and they do that game with the ping pong ball, and they're laughing again, and just for a split second, they like forget within that within the small confines of that car. And forgive me, I always forget his name, the black actor, and he's just a fantastic actor.
Chiwetle Okorafor. I always butcher his last name.
I can't even begin to pronounce. But he is just fantastic.
Yes, he is.
He's one of the fishes, and just within that 5-minute thing where things start to come back to life, Julianne Moore just gets fucking killed.
Oh.
Yeah, out of nowhere.
I remember the first time I saw that, and I was like, what the fuck just happened? Because it's only like 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes into the movie, and she gets shot in the throat. And it's just an awful way to die. That car just gets descended upon by like fucking savages, in the middle of the woods, and they're throwing rocks, and then motorcycles are chasing him, and he's like going in reverse, and then all of a sudden someone just shoots her right in the throat, and she's
gone.
Yeah. And so his heart gets ripped open again. Like really, that's for the first time his heart really gets ripped open. And it's just it's fucking awful. But then we find out that the fishes were responsible for killing her.
Exactly.
And so at that point there becomes no one that you can rely upon, and that the girl Key, who I thought did a fantastic job in this.
I agree.
Because she is like, she's a young girl, probably 18, 19 or something like that. She is actually pregnant. You two down there, Caitlin, I mean, get in here. What do you think? I'm talking too much. Just jump in wherever you want to, please. Anybody.
I mean, I think they do they paint a good, or they did a good job at the gravity of her being pregnant in that moment when she starts to expose herself and her pregnant belly, because obviously he doesn't even think that her being pregnant is even a possibility at this point.
Right.
It's also a very like religious imagery where she's pregnant in a barn, and it's a shock to I mean everyone that finds out eventually. It's just such a crazy scenario to be happening, especially because you totally buy into this world of infertility. So when it does happen, you know that this is the hope everyone needs. Yeah. And that's why people are going to be willing to kill for it.
Yeah. And I think that Theo, as a character, like that is kind of what changes his mind about being kind of apathetic to everything.
Right.
And he kind of recognizes that he might be the only person that is going to try and protect her and this baby. Because, I mean, he kind of, has already seen like what the government does to people that are refugees and, all this stuff. And he thinks the best option is to just try and get her help, like go to the government and get her a doctor and stuff. And they all bring up good points that the government might not even allow her to keep the baby, and they might tout it as somebody else's baby, since they don't want a what they call Fuji being the hope for humanity.
It will become a symbol of the future that the government can hold above everyone else.
But then like they're doing the kind of they're also using, or they're going to attempt to use this woman and her child as kind of
refugees can be good.
Grade,
like refugees are going to be good for us. See, this refugee is pregnant. The English women can't get pregnant. Yeah, it's a political game that they're playing with real lives.
Marty, Frank, what do you got?
I like as the guys were saying there, like Theo's the only one that doesn't have a vested interest. yeah, we know the government are sneaky, dangerous fuckers, but the fishes, they want to use he and her baby as kind of a figurehead for their movement. So like,
Yeah.
it's again, it's going back, and maybe I'm wrong, and what do you think, guys? Like, is civilization, is humanity worth saving? In that, like, you have these two groups who, in their own ways, are fairly deplorable, and it's like, well, if even if she does survive, even if she has the baby, like, what happens if either side gets their hands on this kid? Is it going to be a better outcome for humanity, or is it going to be a worse outcome?
Mhm.
And that's something. As I watched the movie, I was like thinking, Christ is even after the credits, I'm like, humanity still could be fucked, either or. We don't even know this mystery organization, if they're as
The
noble
Human
as
Project.
they're saying, you know?
Yeah, the Human Project. Frank?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Alfonso Cuarón was even quoted as saying that he wanted to make a movie that didn't end when the credits started to roll. That when the credits start to roll, that's kind of where the story begins.
Right.
That his movie is just detailing the prelude to some of the bigger stuff that is coming in that particular story. But one of the things I find interesting about Clive Owen's character is that he himself, in his younger days in the movie, would have been right there next to his ex-wife Julianne Moore, and being like a protester, being an antagonizer of the state, being this, doing that. He is kind of you get to see through him kind of what all of humanity is dealing with at this point. They've all kind of given up.
Yeah.
It's like humanity is just kind of going through the motions, and I think that's one of the reasons why. Again, I talk about the like color palettes of the movie. It's like everybody's just kind of like they're just working till their own death. They know that, okay, we're not having any more kids. Humanity's going to die. We're just going to do what we got to do to get through this life until it ends. And then he kind of gets this fire reignited inside of him. Having, finding out that this girl is actually pregnant, and that's what makes her so special because of the circumstances going on. And then it kind of reignites that desire in him to be that advocate for the people that he was in his youth. And that's what kind of pushes him down his path for the rest of the film. It helps him reconnect with himself.
Yeah.
I think that's why Mike, and when he was first talking with the group, when he found out Key was pregnant, Clive Owen turned around and said, "We need to tell them."
Yeah.
I think the original "We need to tell them" was also the youngest kid, or the last child, just died, and everyone's crying and weeping.
Yeah.
We need to tell them that there's hope, and
Make it
course,
public.
They all had legitimate reasons, but it was also their own agenda at the time.
Yeah, I disagree only to the extent that they didn't have legitimate reasons.
Right.
The baby becomes a metaphor for everyone's power grab. It's just everyone's power grab. We're going to be the symbol of, what reignites. Because what the fishes want really is just a violent uprising.
Right.
They just want to kill people. So, I always think I always land on the side of like not having humanity die. that's
we
my
certainly hope so.
Yeah, but I mean,
you damn optimist.
Yeah, of all people, but I think that his idea to take it public was the best one, which was, of course, never going to be allowed because they all planned to kill him.
Right.
In the same way that they killed Julianne Moore.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, in terms of, his heart's been ripped open because his ex has just been murdered in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that scene where he just finally breaks down in the woods. He's got that cynical look, and he goes off to light a cigarette, and then within a few hours of that, he finds out that Key is pregnant, and that Key has also told him that Julian told her that he would take care of her.
Right.
So all these things happen within 12 hours.
Right.
That have thrust it, just completely 180'd his perspective, and now he's without even meaning to be, he's completely become invested in this girl and this thing that Julian wanted to do, which she wanted to do peacefully. Yeah. So it's almost like a Stalin and Trotsky. Julian wants to do it peacefully, and then they were just like, no, bang, take her out back and shoot her in the woods.
Exactly.
These kinds of things. So, of course, unfortunately, the first thing that Clive Owen thinks to do is to go visit Jasper.
Right.
And again, Jasper provides some of the briefest periods of levity in the movie. And of course, he's got Miriam smoking weed within about 2 minutes of landing. And then, see, cough, it's strawberries, right? You're like, Jesus Christ. No wonder you're so happy. You're just fucking self-medicated throughout the day, But they all start talking, and, you find out that, they were husband and wife, or at least they were together and had a baby, and then the baby died.
Right.
And I guess their relationship didn't survive that. And then, the writing of this, and this is based on a novel by P.D. James. The novel is really, this is bold writing. Because it takes you get invested in these it's like Game of Thrones, like the first seasons of Game of Thrones, where you get invested in these characters just long enough to care, just to watch them get cruelly wiped off the board.
Exactly. I'll be honest, when Michael Caine's character died, I almost walked out of the movie theater. I was pissed. I really liked him a lot.
It was
Mike and Paul said, "Sit down, shut up," and I went, "All right." But I was angry at it.
It was sad when he went, John, but I did like the way he went out, the way he lived. He's like, pull my finger. I like that. I like.
Yeah,
I'm fucked anyway, so I'm gonna go out the way I want to. I like that. That was. It was still sad, but it was kind of like his way to go out.
Yeah, it seemed like the whole movie was, his arc was kind of leading up to that kind of a moment, because he has that little box that's that suicide kit that has been provided by the state, and he could have taken it at any time. He could have given it to his wife and him and just been done. It seemed like he was waiting for the moment for his death to actually mean something, because in any other way it might not have meant anything. So he lived this life that meant something, and then now he's just waiting for the end. But I want my death to mean something as well, because hopefully we're all lucky enough for our deaths to mean something, and his does.
And he gets to see the possibility of a future, through Key's pregnancy. He lives long enough to see that, to sacrifice himself to keep them alive. And I should have brought this up earlier. There's another great character in here, and I can't remember her name. Her name is an actress in real life. The Miriam character, who's the midwife, who has a quasi-religious sort of thing going on all the time. Whether it's sort of some sort of Hinduism, the shanti, these sorts of things. Some sort of, or she's like praying to Saint Michael the Archangel, and this idea that when Jasper dies, the first thing she says to Theo, which is the last thing he wants to hear, is that this is all part of something bigger. This isn't just the thing itself. What you're seeing is a small piece. This is a very compartmentalized thing that we're all, witnessing in this moment, which is part of something larger. And, you can tell it's the last thing that he wants to hear, but it also rings of truth.
Right.
And, who was bringing up that Key, has a sort of religious connotation as a pregnant mother in a manger. These sorts of things, these things are happening, that Julian isn't dying for nothing. That all of these people are just sacrificing themselves to get this baby born, and to safety.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the story of Jesus in the Bible, where like the birth of this baby is like a new start for everyone. As they see the baby, the refugees see the baby, and they stop and they just want to look at it. Same for the soldiers. Like this is the ending, as he walks out, and no one can kill him or the baby, because they know how important this is, and it's a new start for literally everyone.
Yeah, it's like a version of a new covenant. That society maybe at some point, because she gives birth to a girl,
right?
She gives birth to a girl, so there's another possibility that in time there can be even more. And that was important, I thought. If she had given birth to a boy, well, okay, maybe, that would have been something, but she gave birth to a baby girl.
Exactly.
and so that
I-
there is. Go ahead, Marty.
I do like as well. She goes fucking with Theo, and he's like, "Who's the father?" Oh, there was no father. And he's like, "What?" And she said, "No, no, it's some biker. It's some biker." I like that as well.
Yeah. And the Miriam character is. I really liked her. When she starts to give that background about how, because she's a professional midwife. And it's funny. I just met someone the other day, and they're actually in training to become a midwife, and I didn't know that was a thing. But apparently, it's still. I didn't know that was still a thing, but it is. And she's going to school and taking classes and credited courses to become a midwife. And she said that they started to notice that this is the only hint they give towards the origin. It's such great writing. This is such a good story. That they started noticing these mass miscarriages in early terms,
Right.
and then in late term, it started. In just this catastrophe of miscarriages, and then they start to notice that they have no bookings. That the reason for the infertility is never really explained. Now, I think in the book it ends up being like men's infertility or something like that.
Yeah, it was changed from the book to the film.
Yeah, it's changed, but P.D. James and
I think there was a subtle hint in the movie, and it was funny because I saw a little documentary on the movie, and they pointed out what I saw. Because if you remember, going back to the cows image, before you saw Key with the cow in the barn, there were two images where you see burnt carcasses of cows in fields, and then later on towards the end, you're seeing carcasses of cows in the water, and then in the water there's chemical coming in. Like the cows.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, the cows could have eaten something, and since they give the milk to the children and everything else, it could have. That's how it. Without even coming out and saying that was the reason, it was a nice hint to say that possibly could have happened.
I think that Frank hit a point when he talked about it earlier on. This movie certainly hits differently than it did in 2006.
Exactly.
Just 2 years of just constant fighting, and the epidemic itself, the pandemic itself, and the illnesses and the sicknesses and the deaths, and how it's divided everybody. I remember explaining this to a friend of mine once. And just, it wasn't somebody who watches these types of movies, dystopian films or whatever, and they just sort of snickered, and
Right.
you're like, really, okay, whatever. I'm like, yeah, man, whatever. You don't like it, your own fault. But today,
Yeah.
you're like, fuck, this is, what's the next pandemic going to be like? Because there is the impression that there's another one just around the corner or something. Maybe we've all just become, like hypersensitive or whatever, but you get the impression, all right, what's the next one going to be,
John's after pointing something out to me though there as well, that like we're all saying, oh, this whole thing, pandemic is a new thing. But when this movie was released, and it just clocked with me with what John said, the foot and mouth. I don't know, did it ever reach you guys' side of the world? But foot and mouth disease was absolutely tearing through Europe. It fucked over Ireland, it fucked over England, it got into the food chain. And there was so many cattle and sheep that had to be destroyed because there was a fear of it jumping from bovine animals to humans at the time. So maybe that's another thing that might have contributed to the plot or the idea. Because it's just.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, it's just when John said about the cows, I was like 2006. Yeah, that makes sense. That's the time of the big foot and mouth epidemic, which scared the shit out of people at that time, and that could have been a big factor in
my recollection. My recollection of that was that I think it got over here, and I may have it wrong. This is just my individual recollection. That kind of got laughed off. And because it didn't hit here very hard,
right?
There may have been some isolated cases, but it wasn't something that was happening here. It was the same way with bird flu, swine flu or any of those particular things. And I'm not a medical professional, so I didn't have to deal with it in the hospital or anything like that. But yeah, it just kind of went right over our heads. It wasn't until this 2020 thing started to happen that like everybody stood up and took notice. And there was that time for about 6 weeks where we thought this is going to be like scarlet fever or smallpox or some shit like that. And then you realize, and then probably didn't. Well, then it didn't happen, and then people went about their usual selves, arguing about whatever. So,
I was just thinking of bees, with the bees passing away. Every time they keep saying the bees aren't populating, bees, that was another one where all of a sudden everyone was doing the Einstein quote that they said, "If bees go, man follows," or something like that. That was every now and then when you see a bunch of bees dying for some reason or another, people get very heightened about that because it's been like 2 or 3 times in the past 20 years.
Hey, man, I hate to be like Sid the fascist pig, but I just killed some bees out in my back fucking yard because they built a hive
checking out a hornet's
inside
nest
my
tomorrow morning, man. I'm
rotten,
with you. I got you.
rotten bastard stung me right on the arm. I'm like, that's the last fucking thing you're going to do.
Dude, I got stung in the butt in the same exact spot 3 times by these hornets. Trust me, I'm with you. I'm going to take them out tomorrow.
I remember one time I may have had a few beers too many or whatever, it's happened on occasion, here, there, and the other. Yeah, me. And I sat down one time at a party and my legs started to hurt me. What the hell's wrong? Ow. And it wouldn't go away. And I had sat on a fucking hornet.
Yeah.
And it just kept stinging me, like, get the hell off me. Get the hell off me. I mean, Jesus.
I think I was at that party.
So it wasn't long for that. No. You weren't at this particular party, but it did happen. True story. So that was the bees' own dystopian adventure.
There you
go. But we get back to get back to the movie. Michael Caine's character Jasper has an idea to break into the refugee grounds. Which kind of reminds me of like this walled off sort of. It's like Escape from New York. They've walled off this section of London and thrown all the refugees in there. And they've got, some sort of, the Muslim population is like going through a funeral and they're firing off the AKs. So it's not the most stable place, and everybody's just kind of living this, what's the word? Squatting. Everyone's just kind of squatting in there. And they managed to get in there, and the baby is born, which it's a live birth, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody remembers that, and who went to school in the U.S. where they showed you that documentary in grade school, and they actually showed you the woman giving birth, and nobody knew that was coming at the end, and it like scared the hell out of like, what the hell is that? Like you're like 10 years old, you're like, fuck this noise, man, And so, again, she literally gives birth there in the middle of the film. And the reaction of people. Right. There's the America character, the gypsy woman.
Yeah.
And just the way that it brings this thing out, this humanity out of these cynical, sort of semi-dead people. That are, just sort of, like John said, going through the motions. It brings everybody to life, it seems to.
Right.
And, they say, for like grandparents, children are the grandchildren are their chance to be young again.
Right.
They get to be young one more time, before the inevitable. And it just sort of brings this out, and they bring, she brings the baby to friends, and, those two it's a very cute scene where America and the old lady are on the bed, and they're just cackling and like having a great old time around the baby. And the old lady's trying to feed the baby this huge fucking orange wedge. It's like as big as its head. You're like, you haven't done this in a while, have you, lady? Even I know
18 years at least.
Yeah, it's like, okay, maybe I'll take the orange wedge. Thanks. Mom can do the feeding. But the effect that you can just see again, and very similar to the scene inside the car where there's just there's vibrancy.
Yeah.
There's life.
Vibrant. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
life. Life is happening again. And
Mhm.
that's the impact of this kid. It's not necessarily that, because who knows? There may be. That's the great part about this, and just thinking about it now. Maybe there's another woman out there who's pregnant that nobody knows about. Maybe the infertility is this period of infertility is over, because if you had to depend on just one woman to repopulate the world, that's not going to work.
Right.
Mhm.
That's not going to work.
And if I'm not mistaken, Key's 18, right?
Yeah.
And the period of losing children was 18 years too.
Yes.
So, I mean, they may have actually jumped the hump, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like deal.
Yeah. So, that particular, this cycle is over with now. For whatever reason, it may never be explained.
Right.
But hopefully, women are going to start to be able to become pregnant again, which is what the world needs. Marty, you look like you wanted to say something.
This the standout moment for me is that end of that movie, because again, it's the one long shot where you have this like CNN-esque Fallujah battle setting where they're in the middle of a pitch battle, and the minute the kid's born, you've this fantastic camera shot of Clive Owen and Key's character just going through the apartment building, going out, and these people who have been slaughtering the shit out of each other just drop arms, and they're like, and it's a brilliant scene. And then the minute Key and Clive Owen's character gets out of danger, it's just back on. I think it's either back on or the British government decide to bomb the entire slum. Is that what happens?
Well, what ends up happening is, well, let's talk about that scene for a minute. Let's before we get to that, because they steal the baby. The fishes catch up with Clive Owen, and they steal the baby, and they take it into a fucking war zone.
Right.
It's just like what we were saying in The Mist. You ratchet things up, and people start to show you who they really are. Whether it's their best qualities or their worst qualities or whatever. And clearly, the fishes just want power. They want they'll kill whoever they have to get it. It has nothing about representing people. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it also is a contrast to everything leading up to that point, because starting with Jasper's character, he sacrifices himself so that they can get away, but then when they finally get on the bus to go into the refugee camp, the midwife acts.
Miriam.
Yeah, Miriam. She starts to act very religious and fanatic and kind of crazy in a sense to kind of distract her, because now she's going through contractions, and that must have been
water breaks.
Yeah, that must have been a very scary situation to be in for this young woman who has humanity's like shining hope essentially, and is her baby. It must have been a very scary thing to witness, like her being pulled out of the bus, her head being shoved into a bag to essentially be what we assume executed. And then they just meet other people that are just so willing to help this woman, and the first child to be born in 18 years. It's really, that was really what was moving to me, is like seeing all those people sacrificing themselves to just help this woman. And it becomes more than themselves,
Right.
And that's what I liked about it.
As opposed to the fishes who only sacrifice other people.
Exactly. Like they don't care that the baby is going to be put in danger in this situation. Like they're like Luke, the head of the fishes at this point, does still feel, happiness that the baby is there, but he's so far gone into his kind of, I guess, political agenda that it that trumps the first ever child that he's seen in a long time,
He comes around though.
He does come around
at his deathbed, but
yeah.
right before the airstrike.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh shit, maybe I was wrong. Oh yeah, too late. But
We all find religion right before the airstrike.
yeah, right before the
Yes.
airstrike. You know, yeah, no atheists in an airstrike. You know,
That's right.
underneath an airstrike. But you know, there is the scene where he sort of lets them. Well, he doesn't let them go because he still tries to kill Thea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He refuses. At the last, he reneges. He admits that the baby is beautiful, but a second later, he shoots Theo.
Right.
We don't realize it at the time.
Yeah.
And then there's the scene where you're right. It's just a beautiful shot where they're moving, and everybody who's been hiding comes out into the hallway
Mm-hmm.
to see this baby, and people are crying. And then they go down the stairs. And the soldiers are crossing themselves, and a couple of guys fall on their knees, and they cross themselves. It's very powerful. It's a great score. It's a great musical score for this film. And
That's
then
I don't know who did the cinematography, but they should have at least gotten nominated for an Academy Award.
I was just looking at the
beautiful.
This movie was sent in for consideration, but it ended up running up against The Departed.
Okay.
Letters from Iwo Jima, which was a fantastic movie, from Clint Eastwood. Babel, which I think won, and I think this movie is way better than Babel.
I agree.
Oh no, The Queen, that movie with
Miriam,
Helen Mirren, and Diana, and Little Miss Sunshine. So you could have at least gotten rid of Babel, because I didn't think Babel was that great. And this movie is better.
You weren't a babbler?
But here's the thing. And we talk about this all the time on this show. Where are those movies now?
Right.
Like, who the hell's talking about Babel now?
That was Oscar bait, plain and simple.
Yeah.
That movie was made to try and win an Oscar.
Wait,
this was made to be a movie.
Yeah. It's completely different. Little Miss Sunshine, what the hell?
Actually, people still talk about Little Miss Sunshine. I just saw.
I hear a few people talking about that movie.
Really?
That's a fun movie. That's a good movie, but
It's
I don't know what
enjoyable.
I put it for an Oscar, but it's a fun movie.
I don't think it should have gotten nominated for an Oscar, but it was still a good movie.
Even Iwo Jima. I got to get that actually, because he did that double header. Iwo Jima. He did that. Eastwood did that double header Iwo Jima box. I got to get that. Those were good fucking movies, especially Letters from Iwo Jima with Ken Watanabe. But of course, everybody still talks about The Departed. It is my favorite mafia movie. I even like it better than Goodfellas. So unpopular opinion. But in answer to Marty's question, there's the operatic music, and then they get out the building and they're walking, and then everybody starts, and then somebody fires an RPG down on the soldiers from like the fourth floor, and and then it's back on again. So just for this brief moment, and maybe for a minute afterwards, everyone's affected, and then everybody goes right back to killing each other. And there you are, and then Marika. Who I thought I didn't like her at first, but I thought she was a great character by the end. And they beg her to come. He's like, "Come with us, and she won't go. I don't understand why she won't get in the boat. I wanted her. I hadn't seen this in a while, so I just watched this 2 days ago, and I was like, "Get in the fucking boat! Like nothing's going to happen for you here. That's good. Just even remote." She refuses to get in the boat. Her and her little dog.
I feel like she knows that, though.
What do you mean?
I feel like that she knows that the important thing in that moment for her is not that she escapes, is that the future escapes. Like because if she could snap her fingers and send things back to the way they used to be, how many years would she have to enjoy it anyway? That it's not so much about the next 5 or 10 years of comfort for her. It's about several generations of the world maybe putting itself back together. So I think at that point she's thinking bigger picture, like, I need to get the key to the future of humanity to safety. That's bigger than me right now.
That's what everyone has done in this movie.
Oh yeah,
that's what all the heroes have done in this movie, and I'm not sure if Clive Owen qualifies. Well, he is a hero. Maybe he starts out as an anti-hero. I don't know. But that's what everyone has done. They've sacrificed themselves. Julianne Moore has sacrificed. Jasper, Marika, and then Theo at the end. Everybody has just given their life for this baby, a complete stranger.
I think the
I-
hero's arc. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No,
Somebody else.
I'd like the fact he's an action hero that doesn't like fire a gun. I think the only thing he does is bash a guy's head in with a battery, but he doesn't have to fire a fucking round. And-
Sid,
Yeah,
I
yes,
like-
Sid.
I had even pointed that out as we were watching this. It's like at some point, if I were him, I'd have picked up a gun to at least defend myself. But he never touches a gun for the entirety of this movie, which I thought, which
Exactly.
is very interesting.
Yeah.
I think his hero arc, Mike, comes when, like in the beginning, we were talking about it. He's drinking, smoking those cigarettes with the blue filters, and when she goes into labor, the one woman says, "Hey, can I have a cigarette?" and gives her the whole box and moves her. The alcohol all of a sudden is washing, and he never touches the drink again.
Yeah.
I think when it came time for him to step up, that was a moment, and he was taking his vices and using them in another way.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying, and that he has had life bled back into him
Right.
again
Exactly.
in these awful ways. I mean, just all these people that he cares about. He's just watching all the people that he cares about die. His ex-wife died. His only friend dies. You know,
But the
he loses Miriam.
Mhm.
You know,
The first person who died was the child with him and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
That's what
Yeah.
took him into that
Yeah.
hole.
Yeah.
And now, as this second child is coming out, the real,
Theo,
the real Theo is coming out now.
Yeah,
The Theo who was with Julian Moore, like back in the beginning type deal.
and that is the hero's journey.
Yeah, that's the hero's journey.
That's according to Joseph Campbell. That's the hero's journey. You come back to the beginning.
right.
That's where you end up. According to Campbell in his mythology, the hero's journey takes the main character back to the beginning, and that's that's an excellent point. They get in the boat, and that's where we find out he's been shot. That bastard Luke shot him, and he died. He dies, and it's awful. It's awful to watch him die because he deserves so much more.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's just suffered and suffered and suffered, and he didn't ask for any of this, but he's alive again.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that, his humanity has been brought back, into him. But there's an awful scene, and it lasts for about 10 seconds, where she's alone on the boat with the baby, and he's dead.
Mm-hmm.
And she's looking around like she doesn't know what to do. She can't pick up the oars because she's got to carry the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ship comes. And that's the ending of the movie.
Exactly.
And the name of the boat is Tomorrow.
Which is great.
Very metaphorical. Yeah.
Yeah. The end of the boat is Tomorrow.
Tomorrow is another boat.
Tomorrow is another boat. So here's my question. Does the movie is it an optimistic ending?
It's
Marty,
a hopeful
let's-
ending.
Okay, so we'll start with Frank. All right. Frank, go right ahead.
Well, then that like I was talking about, the way Alfonso Cuarón likes to set up the movies, it's a hopeful ending. He leave. I don't want to say the ending's kind of ambiguous or kind of open, because the story in the film has a completion, but at the same time, there is that glint of hope that that the characters all see that we may not see as viewers until we see that boat come out of the mist. And then we feel like maybe there's hope for these people after all. And that's kind of where we're left. I actually kind of like the ending. I mean, I don't think it leaves it open for a sequel as much as it just kind of makes us, it makes us a little more aware. It makes us think about exactly what the message of this film was.
Yeah, I hope that there is not, because, at this point, we all know what sequels are worth. 9 times out of 10. So, I like this film. It's what I want. But it's a hopeful ending. It's a hopeful ending, according to Frank. You two down there, what did you think? Is it optimistic?
I mean, yeah, because sure, it sucks for us that Clive Owen dies, but for the bigger picture, it doesn't matter because the baby's still alive. And the mother with the baby are getting on the boat for hopefully a better future. It could not be. They could be also using them like the government would have, or like the fishes would have, but we got to hope for the best. And
Yeah.
I think the baby getting on the boat is what matters. at the end.
I also like to think that, in the grand scheme of things, at the end of this movie, and after the end of the movie, that the people that pick them up are good people and will keep them together and kind of act outside of the British government, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I do think it is hopeful.
Mhm.
And I'm going to believe that everything works out for these characters in the end.
Yeah, I mean, Lord knows they've been through enough. Marty, what do you think?
Um, again, I don't know, was it the director's intention, but I find myself questioning, was humanity worth saving in the end? So I'm sorry if I come across as a nihilist,
No.
but it's like you go through this harrowing event after harrowing event, and it's like, is it worth it? Are we as a species, if we drop to this level, worth saving?
There's
Right.
there's a documentary in here. Let me just interject real quick where he says something about that, and he said, it just kind of depends. It's a Rorschach test.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you see what you see.
Right.
So okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, but if you put a gun to my head, I'd like to think that the ending was optimistic. That the individuals on the boat haven't their own vested interests, and there is this glimmer of hope. That's what
If
I like
you
to think. I don't know if that's the case with the movie, but I like to think that that might be the case.
I wanna put a disclaimer here for anybody who's going to catch the audio edition that no one put a gun to Marty's head to make him give some sort of optimistic ending. There are no firearms or weapons involved. It's a straight up discussion, and Marty is thousands of miles away, safely at home. So,
Hey, Mike, you need to have a very good fucking aim to hit me. That's all.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Another fucking all right. John.
I don't know. As cliche as it may sound, the ship that picks her up, the sailor to the future, is tomorrow.
Come on.
I mean, there's an old joke from The Simpsons. At the end of one episode, Lisa asks Marge, "I don't get it, Mom. Is this a happy ending or a sad ending?" And she went, "It's an ending. Just deal with it." And it's when you see it, the cynic in me is going, "Yeah, of course, tomorrow, blah, 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 blah." But the optimist in me is going, "That's great." Because you don't even know, it's the next day, which is what everybody wanted to get her to, is to the next day, to the future. What's the line? People plant trees. They know they're not going to sit under the shade.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it, to me.
I am a firm believer in 4D chess, but I swear I've never seen it. I think that this is, it ends on an optimistic note.
Yeah.
I don't think that that you would get to the end of this to be picked up by a boat called Tomorrow. Just for it to mean, the opposite.
Sailed by zombies.
Yeah. That would be then it would be a Zack Snyder movie, and
Exactly.
we'd be having a completely different conversation. It'd probably be a lot more laughs. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is an optimistic note. I think all of these people have died and there are a lot of religious overtures here, and that these people have died so this mother and this baby can live. I'm hopeful that this is the end of just general infertility. In thinking about it and having this discussion, and that maybe the world is on its way to populating itself again, because otherwise, what was the point of the film?
Right.
Otherwise, what was the point of all this that we just sat through for 2 hours? And I love this movie. I own a copy of it. But yeah, I believe it was an optimistic film, an optimistic ending, and that like we said, Theo's character comes back to the beginning again. And that is in Campbell's mythology, the hero's journey.
It's even kind of in his name, because as I recall, what's his name? Thelonious Pharaon is actually Greek for like keeper of the lighthouse or man at the lighthouse or something. And if you think about what a lighthouse is supposed to do, it's supposed to guide the sailors in to the safety of the home port.
Yeah,
so there's another interesting metaphor, just kind of just in his name alone, as to what his place in all of this really was.
That's all true unless you're watching that fucking Robert Eggers movie, and then the lighthouse means something else fucking completely. That's a fucked up movie, man. Fucking, what the fuck?
What you're saying that it wasn't your favorite?
I actually, you know what? We talked about this one time. I actually, after we had that discussion, I went out and bought a $5 copy in the hope that you guys were right and I was wrong, and I'm going to sit down and watch it again and say, "Oh, okay, I get it this time." But I haven't been able to work up the fucking whatever to like pop that in there and go through another 100 minutes of that fucking noise, you know. So yeah, we'll get there maybe.
If all else fails, invite me over so I can watch you watching it. Yeah.
Well, you know what happened? It was off the strength of The Northman, because The Northman came out, and I was a huge fan of The Northman. And then I was like, okay, well, let me see if I'll give it another shot. And yeah, it's still sitting there in the pile. All right, is there any point that someone wanted to address that we did not in terms of this discussion? Did you have anything that we bypassed? I'm happy to go over it again with you. This movie, again, is not streaming anywhere. You're going to either have to pay for it in your digital library or find a copy that you can purchase. I would highly recommend owning a copy of this in your physical collection. I'm a big physical media fan. So, get it. This is film. This is what film is supposed to be.
Mike, one thing I do want to address is when I saw this movie, because it came out a year after. I watched this, but I love this movie. But one thing I also love about this movie is this is the best version of V for Vendetta I have ever fucking seen, and that the Wachowskis made that a year prior, and I'm like, why the fuck didn't this guy make the V for? Because it was, I don't know if have you read the graphic novel? Have you read the Alan Moore graphic novel?
Yeah, I have it right behind me.
I have the graphic novel behind the mask. Actually, it's a box that has the mask and the graphic novel right behind it.
Do you think that this done a far superior job at portraying a more kind of fascist dystopian Britain than the Wachowskis version?
Yeah,
I think they both just take a different approach towards this, kind of the same basic story of how fragile humanity is when even the slightest thing can go wrong.
I think that the Wachowskis version is a lot more over the top.
Oh yeah. It's definitely more theatrical.
This is like I said. This is basically about they're not trying to overthrow the government. Like what V is trying to do is to get back at all the people that did whatever they did to him. He's targeting specific people that know who he is,
right?
And taking this one sort of apprentice under his wing. But I mean, his basic goal is this mass overthrow, which is very stylized. This story here, P.D. James' story is a lot more human.
Mm-hmm.
But I just for the feel and atmosphere, this movie felt a lot more closer to Alan Moore's graphic novel than the Wachowskis version. I just felt.
I don't know that they're actually related. I wouldn't know. I don't know off the top of my head if anybody wants to look real quick when P.D. James wrote this. But yeah, I mean, I would watch this before I watch V. I own V for Vendetta on Blu-ray. The graphic novel is right behind me with all the other Alan Moore shit. But this is different. This is on a different level of filmmaking, I think.
For anybody that might be interested, there's a couple of video documentaries that are about 12 to 17 minutes long on YouTube talking about this movie, but they're all about the subtle things that are behind. One of the things that got me the most when I watched some of them was one person pointed out the fact he thought it was wonderful how they concentrated on England, which is technically by some historians is considered the birth of the modern world. when England was, and he goes, and now it's at the end of the modern world. And they said, if you look at it, they're always talking about how everybody else is failing, but England strides strong or stands strong. It was that very subtle militant. I mean, you saw the things, the people, being treated and everything else, but it was that drilling, very much like 1984, in your head,
And
which
but
I thought was a neat little.
I don't advocate for fascism. Don't misunderstand me. But
Right,
I mean, if it was a choice between the UK and Bangladesh, which is just completely in fucking free fall,
right,
and people were working. I mean, there's violence, and I'm not, talking about
Yeah.
advocating for violence in any sort of way. But that was one of the few countries that managed to keep the infrastructure reasonably intact.
right,
Now obviously there's a lot of wrongdoing, but
right,
in some cases it seems that people were coming there because it was the best place,
right,
and what many people considered the wrongdoing was them being expelled
Right.
back into hell,
exactly.
that kind of thing. So there's a lot more complexity,
Right.
at least in this story than there was in the Wachowskis movie. Alan Moore's writing is a completely different thing entirely, which is
Exactly.
much more layered. Okay, let's get to the point where we rate the movie. Now, Marty and Frank, I don't maybe with the Walk the Cinema. No, you've been here with Walk the Cinema. You've done this. Our rating scale goes from 0 to 5. 0 being I'd rather stick my hand on a hot plate for the better part of a week than watch that movie again. And then we can go from half to 1 to 1.5, all the way up to 5, which is. This is peak cinema. This is, the point of everything, one of the best things I've ever seen, whatever. Let's just start around. We'll go with Marty. How would you rate this film?
I'm going to give it 4.5. I'm deducting half a point for personal reasons. Fantastic movie. Think it's a great movie. It's a hard watch. It's not something you just slap in the DVD player and watch with a bag of popcorn. It's a hard watch. You need to set time aside to watch it, and you may not feel happy out after watching it. So that's,
this is an Armageddon. This is an Armageddon.
Right.
Yeah. John, what do you got?
Well, not to steal exactly from my predecessor here, but I'm actually going to give it a 5.
Okay.
Which I think is the first time I've done on this show.
Okay.
Because it's a hard watch. To me, like I said in the very beginning, to me, this is what a true science fiction story is meant to be. And was it tough at times? Yes. But when it was over, in my head, I'm like, I could watch this again and go through that whole emotional roller coaster all over again for that reason. So I'm going to go with a 5 on this one.
Okay. Frank, what do you got?
I absolutely hate rating movies. Because it can change as time goes on.
In this particular moment,
as I sit here right now, I could give it a pretty solid 4. My only, for one, again, the cinematography you guys talked about is fantastic. I love those tracking shots that Alfonso Cuarón likes to do in his movies, especially when they get caught and the baby gets taken. That one long tracking shot of everything he goes through to try to get back to Key and the baby, I thought was a great shot. He's actually got a couple of shots like that in the movie I think are very well done. The only real down thing about it is the dialogue could have been a little cleaned up in the first act. It seemed like it took a minute to kind of put everything where it needed to go. From the second act on, I thought the movie kind of really found its legs and was just off to the races. But the first act, it should have been very dialogue heavy, since that's not really where all the action was. And I feel like they didn't really quite get there for me. Acting, of course, is awesome. I mean, we've already gone over all the actors. They're all a bunch of all-stars. So I could give it a solid 4 if I have to.
Okay. All right, that's fair. You two, Walk the Cinema. What do we got?
Let you go first.
I'm gonna go with a 4
Okay.
out of 5 as well. It's really solid. I think the third act is it's perfect. It really is. The tracking shots are great. The cinematography really shines with the set design of it. The slumps are just so intricate and beautiful to watch. But I don't love that it starts with an exposition dump from news sites and that type of stuff. And I don't know, it's not a perfect movie to me. It's a really good story, and it's I love it, but there's a lot of flaws in the beginning. There aren't really flaws; they're just preferences, I suppose. But I did drop it like half a point from the last time I watched it
Okay.
because I've just been exposed to more movies, and certain things bother me more now than they did before, I guess.
Okay.
I gave it a 5 out of 5, which I haven't done in a long time. But yeah, it's one of those movies where it is a hard watch, and I cannot imagine myself ever bringing myself to watch this again anytime soon. But I think, yeah, just like from probably the midpoint on, I was just so touched by this story and the emotions that came with it. And yeah, pretty much for the entire third act, I was in tears and like had to compose myself before we started recording The Mist. So it's one of those movies that
Yeah,
I think will stick with me. So 100% 5 out of 5.
And as a woman as well, I mean, going, kind of putting yourself in Key's mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got the
You could
perspective that
really,
none of us can really have. So
yeah,
I can
like
imagine how it would be more of an emotional ride for you.
yeah, she's young. I can only imagine. Like, that was like my whole thing is I like to put myself in a lot of characters' mindsets when I'm watching movies. And so just from the point where they're being taken into that refugee camp, just how terrified that this girl could be, and how all these people try to help her. And I think it does, like, while the movie does kind of show you really bad parts of humanity, selfish parts of humanity, I think it does combat that with showing you the really good parts of humanity, that like we're gonna sacrifice ourselves for someone we don't even know because it's bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
So 5 out of 5.
Okay. I'm going to go with 4.5. I'm going to go with 4.5. As I've said, and I said this at the very beginning, give me a story. And it did. I gave a shit about these characters. I thought it's incredibly well written, well shot, well performed. I was invested from the get go. Yeah, there's something in me that I gave my first 5 last week when I did Joker, which I just felt was a perfect fucking film. And again, it's another movie that's just relentlessly bleak. But you walk out of there saying, yeah, this is what filmmaking is supposed to be. If you believe that, film is supposed to be or can be art, then you start to get into this sort of level, with Todd Phillips. So you start to get here with these sorts of things. There's something in me that doesn't quite get to 5 here. I can't put my finger on it. But definitely 4.5. It's not a weekender. It's not something you put on for the 4th of July, for the kids in the barbecue or something like that. It's not that kind of film, but it's damn near as good as it gets. And with a lot of modern actors, I don't know what's happened to Clive Owen. I think he's doing some sort of series now or something like that, because television is much more lucrative than it once was.
He just played Bill Clinton in that American Crime Story series.
Oh, Jesus.
And he was also in a HBO series called The Nick. It's about the first kind of big surgical department in America.
That's what I've heard of. Yeah, The Nick. The
Mhm.
Nick.
Yeah.
So, of all the films, though, that he did when he was, growing in Hollywood in the early 2000s, I think this is his best one. Fantastic direction. Yeah, I'll give it 4.5. 4.5. So, all right. I guess this is as good a place as any to wrap it up. My thanks to everyone here. Marty, why don't you tell people where they can find you? And if you want to plug something, go right ahead.
My channel is called The Trash Picture Show. At the moment, I'm mainly doing figure reviews and collaborating with my girlfriend. doing things called Trash Fire Cinema, where we review some of the worst, shittiest, and most bizarre cult movies mankind has ever produced. So
This is very true.
Very cool.
Yes. All right, John. Anything you want to plug or no? Anything? Okay.
I
John?
survived. I'm doing well.
Okay. My thanks to John Alvarez, who's made it through yet another stream. And will be joining us again in about 30 minutes for the third stream this evening. Okay. It's like stream marathon tonight. Frank, tell people where they can find you. Have you got anything you want to plug?
You can find me every Thursday over on my channel. It's called The Harsh Truth. We talk about all the craziness that goes on in the world of entertainment, television, streaming, all that. Some stuff about Dan Lin apparently has turned down the job to be the head of DC Films under the new leadership over there. We talk about that and some other things. I do Derailed News and Podcasts on Sunday nights. You can that's where we talk about current events and things like that. And hopefully I'll be dialing up the content on my channel now that I've freed up a little bit more time in the afternoons and evenings. And obviously we're getting into the spooky season, so there's going to be a little bit more horror content. I want to get back to doing the retro movie reviews. I didn't get a chance to do things like The Exorcist last year. A couple of movies I want to get to. So we'll be getting to those as we get into the Halloween season, and hopefully some more collaborations. I've got an idea that I'll talk to Werewolf about here eventually. I'm going to try to work out some details. Hopefully it'll be a big collaboration between a bunch of YouTubers. It will be a fun thing. It's gonna be a fun thing for all of us, I think. But we'll get to that sooner or later.
Cool.
But yeah, come check me out.
Sounds good. I don't know that anybody would want to be the new head of DC Films. That sounds like about as thankless a fucking job as you could fucking have.
Well, word is they offered him $300 million. So if they came to me with a check like that,
I don't know.
I've got a price.
Yeah. Until you have to start to do it. I mean, they go ahead. Well, hold on. They just bet everything on Ezra Miller and the Aquaman movie with Amber Heard, and I'm like, holy shit. And they got rid of Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck to keep Ezra Miller, and you're like, fuck, man.
Mike, they shit canned Batgirl. They basically, the film was done. The film was nearly in the can, and they binned it.
My understanding is that the test audience was like at 23%. The test audience rating. So, I mean, they could still take it as a tax write-off. And they spent $70 million. I think they'd have to spend a minimum of another 70 to 100 in advertising, you know, to kick it off. And they're like, no, fuck that. You know, we're just going to pull the plug. And it's a shame because I saw a great live stream with the two directors. These two guys, they seem like perfectly nice guys. And when they thought it was going to happen, they said, you know, there was a positive experience. And I think they've directed a couple of the Ms. Marvel things. And now that they're out and it isn't happening, I think they've, changed their story. And it's a fucking hot mess. It's a fucking, they're saying it's a dumpster fire over there. So, yeah. All right. But that guy at HBO, I can't remember, the guy at Warner is just fucking slashing everybody, man. They should get him to play the new fucking Michael Myers. Just going and fucking slashing people. All right, that brings me to me, and I will be back here in 26 minutes with John and Eric from Hey Internet Eric here, and Rod. Speaking of dumpster fires, we're going to talk about the new No, not Rod. The Rod's not. I'm talking about the movie we're talking about. We're talking about the new fucking Candyman. Holy shit. Oh my God. I just watched that today and I'm just like, oh, this is really special. Okay. So we got that going on. And
you have 27 minutes to catch your breath.
Yeah. So my thanks to everyone here. And you can find, you know where to find this channel. It's about everywhere you can find podcasts. But my thanks to everyone here on the show tonight. Thanks for coming out and discussing this film. I enjoy these types of films. The crime thriller thing is over, but we're going to be moving into sci-fi and horror once again. And I think I enjoy what John said, that, the best science fiction actually is grounded in some sort of realistic kind of science, to paraphrase him. And I think that's what we had here. So my best to everyone here, and I hope to have you all back in some way, shape, or form sooner rather than later. And to everybody in the stream, have a great night, everybody, or come back in 25 minutes. Bye.
Later.